Hiya, I'm Inkwyrm, and welcome to my Nook. Hope you all are having a lovely time being bad at your skills, so you can be good at them later. This week we're going to talk about TRPGs, specifically a one-sitting method for making monsters. The outcome goals for this are to have a fun piece of art, stat block, and personality for a creature that you can use in various types of TRPGs, like D&D, old school games, or even some of the stranger offerings out there. This will be perfect for art and storytelling practice, or when running your own games and you want to make something a little weirder than usual to throw at your players. You can also modify this to be more conventional, and how we'll do that will be covered closer to the end. This method uses a couple tools. First off, there's the miscast Monster Bash cards. An online version is linked in the description. Then there's the target tabletop game. That's basically your rule set. So stuff like Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Then you have a piece of paper. And then, of course, a mark-making implement. You can also use like a notepad on your computer or like a digital drawing app or something like that in order to substitute for those last two things. We can also use this exercise to train 3 major skills in addition to trying to get a certain outcome. That would be drawing, character design, and tabletop balancing. Finally, you can expand this practice easily enough by adding in a couple of other skills, such as prop making or calligraphy. The art page that we'll come out with can be decorated with in-universe notes or paper treatments to make a bestiary page. With 20 or more of those bestiary pages, you could have enough material to mix in bookbinding as a skill and create a full volume of a bestiary as an in-universe artifact. That final project would be a great way to get into the I know what I'm doing stage of the skill, with a physical capstone to show off. Finally, I've had this take around half to 3/4 of an hour, but for your first time, it will likely take double or triple that, especially if you don't watch all the steps beforehand to spoil yourself. And as for this video, I'll be demonstrating things 3 times with 3 separate creatures. That is to A, have enough footage to fill the time without slowing things down too much, B, to give multiple examples for different TRPG systems, and C, because I had a bunch of fun with the exercise. A disclaimer before we begin. I'm not covering more narrative-based games such as Powered by the Apocalypse systems, since they go in a much more individualized direction with playbooks and story archetypes rather than abilities and stats, which is the core of what we'll be doing here. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started. The first step is to do the Monster Bash challenge. Select 7 cards with different starting elements and use those cards to make one weird creature. This challenge was made by Trent of Miscast, channel linked in the description. And the digital version, again linked in the description, was pulled together by The Wizard Zook, Zebra, and Smarty Man. The Monster Bash challenge was created with the intention of people using those cards to make miniatures, but I'm repurposing it to make quicker sketches and drawings. So if you want an easier/looser setup, feel free to just use 3 or 4 cards out of the 7 drawn. I've found that that's more fun for me, so I'll be doing 4 cards for this video. This lower number also allows me to help simplify the drawing and select the best cards that I want to try out together. Now, you can interpret these cards any way you wish. They're just there to make the blank page less blank when you start out, which is another video I'd like to do soon, randomness as the starting point. As well as these separate elements create a fun challenge to pull together those weird aspects into a cohesive whole. So, now that we have these monsters, we just have to scan them in, assign stats, lore, personalities, and abilities to use them. A lot of this is based on your system and themes of the game you want to use these creatures in. So I'll put each of these in a different example system and show a few ways of how this can work. First off, I'll use this creature for Errant Challenger, a big book game. Big book games I tend to define as having a lot of rules, character options, 5 or more stats, and pre-made abilities. A couple of examples of this are Pathfinder and D&D 3rd edition onwards. So, for Errant Challenger, I have a link to the playtest, download in the description. please do check that out. It's something that one of my friends, Folks, has been working on for the past couple of years, along with my brother, Scat the Goblin, and I have actually been playing it as well. You can even see a live play of it that I posted last week. Moving on. For the big book setup, you can just pick numbers and abilities that already function within the game. It's the most guided way for someone to use this exercise. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this kind of chimera thing and make a boss monster. Something that may have a couple minions but will be the primary threat of the encounter. I'll also set this creature to level 2, where the players are looking at their first subclass choice. So the players are still weak, but they have some of their signature abilities available now. Now what we're going to do, since we have the system and we have our art, we're going to look at that art and guess at what this thing can do. It helps keep things in theme with your creature and allows your players to similarly guess at the creature's abilities right off the bat from seeing what this thing looks like. Now what we're going to do is select 3 or 4 abilities from the class and racial lists available, and maybe a couple secondary features, like a trick, talent, or feat. You don't have to be locked into like one class or one subclass. You can be, well, in this example, you can have a sorcerer ability as well as a bunch of fighter abilities. We're going to feel free to go up and down levels, but generally keep things around to your player's own level. So in this example, that would be level 2. I don't believe I got anything more than level 3. As you can see, we have some kind of chimera with what looks to be a rat's head, bird wings and legs, some strange claws, and a bear's body. This will be a creature with a bunch of disconnected abilities and stats, mostly focused on its physical body parts. The starting attributes for this system are strength, agility, focus, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. Also, there are some secondary attributes, stamina, mana, and luck. Those secondary attributes determine what resources this creature has and how many times they can use their abilities. All of these stats range on a scale of 0 to 20, with an average person sitting at 10, so we'll work within those bounds. As we covered earlier, this creature relies on its physicality, and already looks pretty bulky, so let's set their strength at 18. But these parts are all disjointed and probably don't work very well together, so we'll set the agility at 6. Focus, wisdom, and charisma really don't matter, so we'll put those at the base for nonverbal creatures. 7 points. Stamina. That'll be bumped up, as whatever wizard made this chimera probably threw in like 4 hearts to make things go. 16 points. Mana, we can say this will be higher than average since there has to be some kind of magic holding this monstrosity together. We'll put it at a 14. Usually this wouldn't be any use to non-magic users, but I have a little bit of a way around that. That'll be a little secret that we put in a pin for later. Finally, luck. I like using this as a way to say whether something is liked or disliked by the world, and the world really doesn't like whatever freak of artificial nature this thing turned out to be. 4. That's going to be pretty low and make this thing generally unlucky. So those are all the base stats. I'll do the math for everything that comes out of those off camera. Next up, let's get a few abilities on this thing. We can grab 2 easy ones from a couple of the fighter subclasses. Berserker and Brawler have Roar and Snatch. Roar is a nice debuff and taunt, and I want to describe what a gigantic rat head screaming with bare vocal cords would sound like. Then, Snatch is effectively a fighting game grab and slam, and we can represent those freaky grabby claws with this ability. But how are we going to show off those wings? There's no way this thing would be able to sustain flight, so let's not give it a fly or a glide speed. But I think there's a fun way to do this with a sorcerer subclass, Aeronaut. Aeronaut is effectively wind magic, and its Zephyr Step is perfect. It gives us a flying dash and temporary hover, equivalent to this thing using its wings to enhance a jump, and holding it into the air for a second before floating down. But does it make sense for this ability to use mana, so we'll convert that to stamina. Now, just one more thing to give this creature some real spice, and we'll use that mana stat that we set up earlier. Magic isn't in this chimera to be used by it intentionally. However, it's definitely there to reinforce the body and hold it together. So why don't we just have it do that with the Endure talent? This allows us to substitute mana for health when taking damage every other round. Finally, let's choose what weapons and armor best fit this creature. Scimitars feel pretty close for what those bladed claws look like. And this creature literally has a hide, so we'll give it hide armor. So there we go. All that's left is a name. I tend to be bad at coming up with these, so I usually let my players have fun doing that. In this instance, though, I'll have y'all in the comments come up with that one for me. And while you're down there, commenting some fun names, tap that like and subscribe button for me. I'd really appreciate it, and I have some fun things in store for y'all in future videos. Now that we're done with that first one, let's move on to our second creature and system. This will be a small book game. This includes many zine games, especially old school Renaissance style. Small book games revolve around a stats spread, some skills, equipment, but not many class abilities. And frequently, that stat spread that I mentioned is like 3, maybe 4. You can have that 6 or 7 stats, but it's not usually that common. A lot of the time, this system is all up to player ingenuity. In Knave, the system that we're going to be using today, there are no classes at all. Players' roles are defined by their stats and what they carry. A wizard is someone with a spellbook. A warrior has armor and a sword, and etc. There's not much scaling between levels, and there are many creatures that are just stronger than what players could ever be. But rarely are they ever smarter. So we'll have to get a little bit more creative here. We'll be using the physical characteristics to determine stats and maybe a few abilities. However, the parts that define this creature in players' minds are its tactics. Enemies in the OSR style games are things to be negotiated with or outsmarted rather than killed because you have the bigger stick, because you rarely have the bigger stick. For example, skeletons usually work very differently than zombies. Despite them being fundamentally similarly statted and themed creatures, skeletons tend to use tools and only show up as individuals or small groups. But zombies are usually barehanded, even if they have hands left. And they tend to roam around in hordes, so even these two aspects create wildly different creatures that could have the exact same stats and abilities. So, now we have this guy. For this creature, let's go with something strange. I mean, this thing looks like some kind of extra-dimensional force. Now, maybe this creature is not necessarily like something with a gigantic body that it's going to beat people up with. I mean, it certainly looks like it has that, but it looks kind of weenie. Maybe it's instead a spellcaster that has a couple spells that can be used to either help or hurt the party. It has a goal that it wants to achieve and is happy to get someone else to do it. I mean, look at that slimy expression. Also, I have a name right off the bat for this one. Skrixel, with 3 Z's and 2 L's. Let's start out with figuring out those spells. I like anthropomorphize from this 100 example spells, but let's edit it so that this thing is talking to players by using that animal. Then the animal could get that triangle face on it. Increased gravity, mirror walk, and ooze form will round out things with this baseline list. I think that it'll make it so this thing is not really offensive, but can certainly hold its own in a fight and kind of get away with things. I'll also add another spell or ability that's not in the provided 100 examples. Magical Inversion. This allows this creature to invert a spell cast in its area. This could allow decreased gravity to become increased gravity, or vice versa. Then you have stranger things like, some of the other spells that it has, or anything cast by the party. Feel free to get creative with what you want to allow at the table. I mean, that is what OSR is about in its core, being creative with what you can do. It's very apparent that this thing wants to bargain instead of overpower. But what does it have to offer? Well, it could write spell books for each of its spells, a rare thing indeed. But that would require the party to make it worth this thing's while if they want to get any of the spellbooks from it. I mean, this thing probably knows them inherently from whatever dimension it came from. Being able to write spellbooks is certainly heavily worth it, and they're not going to try to just straight up kill this thing. It can't write when it's dead. Finally, let's give it some stats. These stats go all from 1 to 6. Let's give it 4 strength for that big weird body, then 3 dex because this thing probably could have done yoga across time and space before it let itself go. 1 con because this thing is totally a weenie. 2 intelligence since the laws of nature where it grew up didn't work quite the same way they do here. Wisdom gets 5 points, and then charisma gets a 6 because this thing is cunning and it's a good negotiator. Finally, Skrigslix will be more of a quest giver or patron rather than a one-off problem you swing a sword at, leading to many fun encounters and challenging setups for your players. Now that we're done with the OSR style, we'll go with a game type I call Neo System. Think of it like the other or strange category. I made this category to define the games that are not necessarily narrative-based, but also don't have the same typical system of roll dice and follow the pre-written ability. And they usually have been written around the turn of the millennium, or later. For this example, let's use Spell the RPG by Whimsy Machine, website link below. Spell is a game where essentially everyone's a word game wizard. You make spells by spelling out their titles from random letters. This game does have stats, but they're more narrative and motivation based. So things will have more flowy vibes where you justify interpretations and play around with words rather than just roll your math rocks at problems. Here's our final creature, a slime dragon of some kind. Looks pretty grumpy and tired. On top of that, its tail seems strange. Is that the back of a giant arrow stuck to it? Let's figure out this creature's stats and see what we want to start out with. In Spell, stats are called impulses, which are the character's drives and defining characteristics. And these characters start out with 12 points to distribute across those 12 impulses. You don't want to put points into all impulses, and in fact, you just want to select 3 or 4 that serve as your main ones. Going back to this slime dragon, I think it's easy to give 4 points to feeling, accounting for its general grumpiness, 3 to force since it's a literal dragon, and it's used to pushing through until something happens. And of course, it will pull rank on people with its 3 in renown. And finally, we'll give it a 2 in style because of that fashionable accessory on its tail. Now, we'll give it some pre-made spells. I drew some tiles on the Whimsy Machine digital tool and built a few. Tirade is a fun feeling spell. Just imagine this thing going off on some adventurers that just want to get it to stop eating the local farmer's sheep. Esteem seems perfect for renown. This slime dragon has such a massive ego. It holds itself high in high regard and can either defend or heal itself with that limitless self-esteem, or even put someone down if they are not of a high enough social rank. Slobber Air could be a force spell that represents its slimy dragon breath or its spittle-filled sputtering when people dare to suggest that it isn't allowed to bathe in the local town's drinking water. All of a sudden, we have a whole session planned off this one grumpy dragon that keeps being a public nuisance. Players could, of course, go after it with swords and pitchforks, but the meat comes in when the slime dragon turns into a social encounter. It'd be perfect for a relaxing afternoon full of whimsy and adventure. So, there's that. As you can see, this is an awesome way to make some fun monsters, whether they be scary, creepy, or even silly. With some fun inspiration, evocative art, and a little bit of interpretation, you can make some awesome things happen in just one sitting. Now, if you want to make things a little bit more down to earth, feel free to choose your references and inspirations instead of drawing random cards from the Monster Bash. This would make it a more cohesive whole rather than these sometimes disjointed ideas. Of course, if you're not a game master of some kind, that's fine. I hope you have fun with this little practice exercise. It's a great way to play around with your skills and make something with just half an hour or so. But for now, that's all I have for you. For you, those of you with dark skies, good night. And people who have sunny days, good morning. I hope you all have a lovely day, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is in your part of the world. Goodbye.